Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear here, and the order of creation in Genesis 1. I like that title, Doug.
I think that what we need to do is to take a little bit of a look at the two different models of origins. We have Plan A is that you can get everything from nothing. And that is the theory of evolution. And Plan B is the story in Genesis. I don't know if there's really any Plan C or D or
They're
E.
usually variants of one or the other. You have theistic type evolution type things. You have different things where they kind of hybridize things, or you've got the Big Bang as opposed to the steady state or the planetesimal theory, but they all kind of basically, one is everything came from nothing by naturalistic means,
Right.
and the other came by supernatural first cause. Okay?
Right. So let's take a look at the first one here. You start out with nothing. Okay, and so somehow we're going to get everything from nothing. And then there was a Big Bang. Now the question is, well, what makes up this Big Bang? Where did you get this energy from? And so you have light happening, you have virtual particles. This is the theory that Lawrence Krauss come up with.
Yeah, as I understand it, Doug, what they talk, and of course it might as well be nothing, because it's supposedly there is a particle, but it's like infinitely small.
Mm-hmm.
Infinitely means it doesn't exist.
Right.
It seems to me, but that sort of begs the question a little bit. But let's
sort of like a mathematical construct.
Yeah, and it's really a conundrum to me because you are getting everything from nothing, but it's their best way they can to get rid of a supernatural cause, and that's really what they have to do. To do that.
Something jackdaw-shaped thing happened in the cosmos there.
Yeah, there's no explanation for why it is. A lot of people who are Christians and even creationists, not creationists, a young Earth creationist or a young universe creation, but the long agers and things like that believe in a Big Bang because it says it supports the biblical worldview that there was a beginning, as opposed to the steady state or the planetesimal, where everything was just an unending. It's always been around forever and ever and ever. It's almost like a Hindu type of pantheon, if you will. That's an ever-ending recycling of whatever it is. But the Big Bang purports to have a beginning because the empirical evidence shows that there is a beginning.
Right. It shows everything's going
stretching
up,
and
stretching out.
Yep.
So we have then the first element shows up is hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been books, doctoral theses that talk about the beginning, the hydrogen beginning of the universe. And then they have theories about how all the elements had been formed through the generation of stars and through nuclear synthesis. And so that's something that we have to take into account. How do you actually do that? And that's what all this nuclear physics is all about. Is the train with the CERN accelerators and the
and I've never been able to understand, Doug, how heavier elements get formed out of the lighter ones. And there's probably obviously there are probably, like you say, there are theses and explanations, but it's all like ad hoc. It's what we used to call just so stories.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of, nobody has any empirical evidence that this happens today by any stretch of the imagination, but somehow from the lighter elements, the hydrogen and helium and things of that nature, we end up getting carbon and just gold, lead, silver. How do you get all that stuff from these lighter elements? And plus, you've got the Big Bang, things are stretching out. They're going farther away from each other.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get condensation where things collect in bodies large enough to even produce things like gravity and magnetic fields and things of that nature? So those are things that really, to me, really beg the question of how can you explain these processes by what we can observe or even extrapolate from. You can extrapolate, but it's basically a religion then. It's basically a faith in naturalism at that point, because no one's ever seen it happen as far as I can they can observe the stretching out, but outside of that, the redshift and things of that nature. But you can't really get a handle on how these things actually form, Doug. I mean, it seems to me.
Right. If you have a synthesis of an element such as chlorine, for example, is there something where you can actually document in nuclear synthesis the formation of chlorine and how it could happen without intervention from an intelligent source? There really isn't. You have silicon and nitrogen and carbon and these common elements, these little elements.
Yeah, and as hard as that is, Doug, as difficult as that is for me to imagine, you can imagine anything, but based on what we observe, that actually happens, then you get the sticky wickets when things really start getting dicey.
Mm-hmm.
You start getting. How do you get like amino acids?
Right.
And nucleotides, and how do you get, I like this, you got it written down here, the great oxygenation event and water. You want to talk about that a little bit, Doug? Because that to me is amazing,
Well, before you have that, you got to have the sun, the earth, the moon, and the planets.
Exactly. I mean, I've shortcut it. We're sliding past all of that, and that to me, we were talking about the planetesimal bodies, the planet bodies, and the gaseous bodies, how they can form, how they can condense when everything else is, from the Big Bang scenario, is expanding outward. It's not really coalescing, In
order to have life, you have to have, first of all, amino acids. And of course, when Stanley Miller did his experiment and created these amino acids in the test tube, which also contained a whole bunch of tar and gunk and this brown sticky goo, which I tried to emulate, and I found out that
you get brown sticky goo.
You get the brown sticky goo.
Those amino acids.
Yeah, those amino.
We don't have any nice ones. We just don't have the amino ones. Anyway, okay.
And nucleotides, they're even a little bit more complex, and you have to have those to form the DNA and RNA and all these different compounds that are in life, and then have them all work together in one pretty nifty cycle of synthesis. You can't have one without the other.
All of these things, Doug, all of these steps that we're building on, we're going very fast in a sense, but all of these need to be done by naturalistic processes, by properties inherent in matter, or in the case of the Big Bang, properties inherent in non-matter, or virtually nothing. Something comes from nothing. Okay, if you make that leap, these other leaps, I guess, maybe aren't as big, but every one of them are gargantuan. They're huge.
Well, if you want to get rid of God, though, and get rid of the responsibility of dealing with God, then this is what you're faced with.
This is what you're faced with, yes.
And so it's sort of like having somebody come up with a list of excuses that they're going to use at the Great White Throne Judgment.
Yeah.
And so that's a problem, because there's going to be a lot of things you're going to answer, because you're swallowing all these whoppers of lies, So then you're going to have, after you get some amino acids and nucleotides, you're going to have to create peptide bonds to form proteins. You have to link all the nucleotides together with sugars and phosphates and whatever makes that lattice.
And they have to be in the right order, the right kinds.
Right. And then they're going to have some sort of computer code and meaning in 4 different dimensions. And so then all of a sudden now you've got the beginning of something where that can actually evolve. All right. And so now we got on the scene comes this beautiful, wonderfully randomly designed bacterium. And or maybe a precursor would be a virus, okay? But viruses need bacteria in order to produce, and so you can't have one with the other. So which came first, the bacteria
or the virus?
It's all right.
New slant on the chicken and the egg thing, huh?
And then you have prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and there are different kinds of bacteria, and they're totally different in the way that they work.
Yeah, it's plant and animal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the shellfish, clams, fish, amphibians, reptiles, all getting deposited in that order as they evolve. So in the geologic column, you have on the bottom, you have the clams and fish, and actually you have clams throughout.
There was a John Moore said this years ago. About 95% of all the fossils you find, what are clams?
Yeah, and then
Virtually clams.
95% of the 5% that's left over are fish. So.
Yeah.
So then you have up at the top, and these are really, we'll talk about the sequence in the Genesis model next. But
Yep.
then you have the fish and the amphibians and reptiles. They keep getting a little bit more complex and more complex. And actually, the reptiles, they get really big and they become dinosaurs. And then branching off from that, there are some totally different creatures like the birds and the mammals, lemurs, monkeys, and apes. And then everything
After millions
goes
of years,
millions of years, you have an ice age. And all of a sudden, the environment changes. You have a global cooling take place and a catastrophe, and then you also see lots of floods take place, disasters. You have the dinosaurs wiped out by a meteorite, and
this is where you're starting to get the Australopithecines, and then the Homo erectus and the Homo habilis and then Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon. All this period of time where mankind starts evolving upwards. It's about 4 million years ago.
And here the story diverges. Whether you are a theistic evolutionist or an atheistic evolution. And the diversion here comes is if you are really wanting to retain a little bit about the story of the Bible, but you want to accommodate all these things that you've been taught in school, okay, then appears Adam and Eve. This is a specially chosen ape.
Yeah.
Out of the whole myriad of...
two specially chose you, Adam and Eve.
Yeah, okay. And now, how they got chosen out of it is a good question. And so now then you have everything that happens in the book of Genesis. But all this stuff took place millions of years ago before then. And of course, because we are continually evolving, guess what? Because we are so smart and so intelligent because of all the things that we've achieved, we're going to be evolving to conquer the stars. And maybe there's going to be an evolution 2.0 in us, where we're going to start evolving new features for the creatures. And that's going to be a whole different plan that's coming about as a result of our evolution. And so you see this all being taught in the public schools, and this is a plan that is really
the real problem, Doug, I mean, I've read a lot of science fiction, or have in the past, and it's enjoyable, and so much of it is evolutionary in nature. But what's really bad, Doug, you get this the technology, we're evolving, and everybody's evolved, they've conquered all these stars, and they go, now what is there left to do?
That's right, yeah.
There's really a sense of hopelessness in all these scenarios. They go, 50 million years in the future, or 25,000 years in the future, or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter.
But the problem is that at a certain point in the short lifespan of a man, he's going to die.
Yep.
What are you going to do with that, okay? Is there going to be a mechanism that's going to take care of you afterwards? Is there a piece of us that's immortal, or if when we die, what's the end of it? That's going to be a real problem.
So, Doug, that's the first scenario. We really did shorthand version, because there's every one of these steps we went through is immeasurably complex,
and it takes an immeasurable
amount of faith to believe in them. Okay. And then we get to the second part. This is part B, if you will, which is what we subscribe to, obviously. And we think the evidence and the logic and the purpose and all of the things are really on that side of the coin, Doug. And that is the book of Genesis. Is it accurate as far as what it tells you? And if it is, obviously, then it tells you in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So, in one sense, and it says, and the earth was without form and void. It's interesting, Doug. It's like they're in parallel dimensions sometimes, Doug, because they need naturally. In the beginning, they have nothing. We have God.
Right.
But he creates ex nihilo, out of nothing. In other words, the material universe, Doug, was created virtually out of nothing, without form and void. Unless you want to, whatever the primordial waters were, whatever those waters, the spirit would float on the face of the deep. I don't really know what that fully is. I don't know if you ever had any theories or anybody wrote much about that, but I've always pondered about that. What is that waters that the spirit hovered upon? But, I mean, Humphreys talked about a big ball of water. But anyway, and water is, of course, helium and hydrogen. Hydrogen and oxygen, sorry. Hydrogen and oxygen. And so there's things that are, I see things in similar as they talk about the Big Bang, things are stretching out. And what does it say in Genesis? He stretches out the heavens. I mean, he stretches them out. So there are things, but they're not willing, people are not willing to give an intelligent causation factor to why this has all happened. In other words, I mean, Doug, there are scenarios where, well, there's infinite amounts of universes. The one we're in just happens to got it right. We have no evidence for infinite amount of universes. I don't know. There could be other universes. There can perhaps, God in his wisdom or majesty, but we have no evidence for it as far as I know. People talk about other dimensions and other things, and we know there's heavenly realms and things of that nature, but at least from a biblical perspective. But what I'm saying, it's interesting. God created the heaven and the earth. Everything from nothing, or there was a causation. There was because everything in our empirical scientific worldview, as atheist as you want to be, always has to have a first cause. Everything is there's causality. There's a reason for things to happen, and there's no reason for the Big Bang to have happened.
Now I hear people say that, well, the order of creation really follows the order of evolution.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get at here, is that it really doesn't. Let's take a look at it. The first thing that happens after God creates the heaven and the earth, and it's without form and void, and he says that let there be light. And then there is an evening and a morning, and so there's actually a rotation that's taking place in terms of that light. Mm-hmm. And then you have the creation of the firmament, which is the atmosphere. And it says, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And so
that's
there's water vapor up here, then water in the
because again, the Bible talks about the stars are in the midst of the firmament.
Right.
So it's bigger than our atmosphere.
Well, that's day 4, okay.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying, it's bigger. It's huge, yeah. Yeah, anyway.
So on day 3, and this is even before there's lights in the firmament, and that could be because everything's from the perspective of the observer on the ground here. You have the creation of dry land, grass, fruit, and herb, and everything that's going to seed. And this is something that's taking place for the first. And so in the evolutionary scenario, you're not talking about anything going on in dry land.
It's all in the water.
It's all in the water, okay?
Yep.
And then apparently the cloud cover gets taken away. You see the lights in the firmament, and it says God made these lights, and so let there be lights in the firmament in the heaven to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and days and years. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night.
Oh boy, I got a lot of arguments with that, Doug.
Stars are also, yeah.
They get a lot of, you're talking really flipping things on. How do you have grass and fruit and herbs before the sun? You know, now there's creationist ways where they talk about, well, the sun was there, but you couldn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to, I mean, some of the words are slightly different, but it appears that these sun and moon were created on day 4. Okay, the reality is, Doug, this could maybe sound strange, but all you really need is a rotating body and a point of source of light. And if the light was God, that's all you need. And God is the one creating. God is the one that makes life in the first place. So why would he not be able to be the source of light? And all you have is day and night. All you have to do is have a spin. But it wasn't until day 4 he delegates these lights, if you will, delegates light to actual physical bodies called the sun and the moon and the stars.
You have evening and morning after each of these days, which really refutes the idea of millions of years.
Oh yeah.
You know, you're talking about each day being an event where God is doing some creating, some massive amounts of creating.
Well, I think go back to the point of the order, Doug. Of course, we talked about the stars, but the whole idea is that, and you talked a little bit about everything was in the water, but they're making like the birds and the beasts. I mean, they're like on different days. They're not. The order doesn't match up. In other words, is what I'm saying. You know?
Yeah, you have on day 5 start out with whales.
Yeah.
All right.
They're sea animals.
Sea animals,
and according to evolution,
and then birds at the same time.
Yeah, birds and whales. And what happens is, like, because evolutionary things like sea creatures, like whales or dolphins or creatures, some of them went up on land and they went back in.
Right.
And yeah, no, they were made the way they were. Okay.
And day 6, you have animal life and man being created, and of course that gives you the question. Why do people think that the order of creation is the same thing as evolution?
I guess because people do a general whitewash. They go, well, the highest of us is man, and Genesis has man created last, so they just kind of short circuit and just go from the beginning all the way to the end and kind of don't really pay that much attention to it. They go, well, it's sort of close, and that's what it is. That's the day age theory, Doug. Isn't that what it is?
That's what it is.
Yeah, each age equals a day.
Of course, there's also a different theory that many earlier Christians talked about during the first half of the century, and that's the gap theory.
The rule of Reconstruction, yeah.
And that's where you have, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and
then it became without form and void, right?
It became without form and void. So they put the gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about that over the years, Doug, and I give them credit. The church basically got caught with their pants down. Sorry, they just didn't. The church did not really talk about scientific things. The earthly things were kind of ignored for a long period of time, and as the world became more and more secular, they got caught, and suddenly they didn't really have a defense for the biblical. All of a sudden they're digging up dinosaur bones, and they're digging up, and the rock strata is being laid down by certain processes, and they go, well, it must have taken hundreds of thousands, and then it became millions, and now it becomes billions, and all of that threatened the biblical worldview, and people in their heart knew God was real. They felt in his heart. There'd been conversions. The society was better. All things that were so much better because of Christianity were threatened, and so they come up with a theory that they felt the scientific evidence was overwhelming, because guess what? Most of these pastors were ignorant of science,
right? Yeah.
And so they didn't know how to defend themselves. And what happened is that they come up with this theory. Well, this happened, but it was way in the primordial, way back in the past, and then everything was destroyed, and then God remade it again in 7 literal days.
Right.
Okay? And the problem, you and I have talked again with many, many things about this. Every one of these scenarios, day age, rule and reconstruction, gap theory, progressive creation, theistic evolution, all of these really defy, and again, we talked about this a few weeks ago on the show that I did with my dinosaurs. You have death before Adam. Mm-hmm. You have death and disease and destruction before Adam came on, you have, as a believer, if you're not a believer, I understand why you want to have reasons to accept this other stuff. We're trying to tell you the evidence is really going on the creation side. But as a believer, Doug, it makes no sense to subscribe to a theory that compromises the fact that Jesus came to undo the effects of the curse, which was physical as well as spiritual and emotional death. It was all things. The beasts of the field, the plants of the field, man, they were all cursed at the fall of man. And that means you couldn't have had T-Rexes killing each other for millions of years, and Allosaurus is chomping on Brontosaurus for millions of years.
And then you have
And
the
disease.
pre-Adamite race, of which
Yeah.
a lot of people subscribe to.
Oh yeah,
And they caused quite a bit of difficulty in the church and outside the
Lots
church,
of it.
because they, it's really the foundation of many racist ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I just had the other day, it was a gal at church believed that, well, Cain, there was all kinds of other people over here, and Cain got a wife from some other land. I said, don't you know that the land of Nod is any place Cain wandered? It just means wandering, okay? That's all it means. So the land of Nod was any place, and he must have married his own sister or could have been maybe a niece, or it could be a niece, but a granddaughter, whatever. But the point of it is the Bible is very clear that from one blood, Adam and Eve, all flesh has come. All races, all peoples have come from one flesh.
And then
This is Acts chapter
similarly,
7.
from Noah and his wife and their sons.
Yeah, that's the
and
second
wives,
bottleneck. Yeah.
That's the second bottleneck, where there would have had to have been intermarriage between close relatives. And
Doug, I tell people this. Think about this. You somehow, it would give you all this other stuff, okay, which could never happen. In 4.6 billion, 14.6 billion, it could never happen, okay? The fact of the matter is, okay, if suddenly, how do you get from two ape-like hominids, you get an Adam and an Eve?
Right.
And that happened like 4.5 million years ago. Maybe with the modern Cro-Magnon, it's 100,000 years or 150,000 years, whatever the time limit is. We would have been mentally retarded misfits, hemophiliacs, 300 times over with inbreeding. Now you say to me, well, you started out with two. I said, yes, but the genome was created perfect by God himself. That is a big difference. And there was a huge difference.
The genome was created perfect, and we've been deteriorating
ever since.
Not evolving upward
Yes.
ever since, and improving and improving, which is and so this the science matches the biblical account.
Yes.
Science does not match the evolutionary account.
Amen to that.
And so I think that this is a good proof that, if you need to believe this book, believe what's in the Word of God from day one.
And there's no reason to feel ashamed to
No.
believe that from the very first verse.
Well, we hope you enjoyed our little journey into Genesis this evening. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.
Yep.